Warm greetings to the Loving Truth Stories family. Today, we bring you an inspiring love story where faith and sincere affection can overcome every barrier. Let's begin this journey right now, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so together we can spread the most beautiful values of love and life. It all began with an unexpected moment. When the man everyone thought was untouchable, the powerful CEO with the world at his feet, suddenly found himself face to face with the one woman who could change everything. In that instant, a clash of pride, love, and destiny unfolded. Have you ever been asked to leave a seat you paid for, only to make way for a more important person? If it happened in front of dozens of people, would you silently ignore it or stand up for your dignity? Today's story begins at Los Angeles International Airport, where a man who few knew would bring an entire airline to its knees with just one decision. Alexander Thornell, 45, is the founder and CEO of Thorn Innovations, a software company that provides data and operational solutions to large corporations. He is not only rich with billions of dollars in assets, but also a man with an attractive appearance. Tall, with a bit of salt and pepper hair, a sophisticated gray suit worn over a simple turtleneck sweater. However, behind the halo, Alexander always carried a loneliness. His wife died many years ago in a plane crash, leaving him to raise his only daughter, Emily, alone. That grief made him cold and arrogant in the eyes of many people. Alexander had just finished a business trip in New York and was flying back to San Francisco that day. He had booked his first-class seat 1A 3 weeks earlier. It was his usual spot, not for the luxury, but for the sense of familiarity and consistency in a life of uncertainty. As Alexander sat down, buckled his seat belt, and closed his eyes to rest, a flight attendant with a tense face approached. Her voice was polite but lacking in confidence. "Mr. Thorne, there has been a slight seating mix-up. We need you to move to seat 3C to make room for a VIP passenger in seat 1A. Alexander opened his eyes, looked down at the ticket in his hand, then looked up and calmly replied, "Excuse me, but this is the seat I booked and paid for. I don't think there's any mistake here." Behind the stewardess, a young man stepped forward, haughty, in shiny leather shoes, holding a glass of wine from the lounge. It was Brandon Huxley, the son of a large real estate conglomerate, known to be a frequent customer of the airline. Brandon smiled faintly, crossed his arms, and looked at Alexander. "This seat is mine. I fly this flight every week, and seat 1A is always reserved for me. You don't mind, do you?" The atmosphere in first class was tense. A few passengers looked over silently, pretending to read magazines but clearly waiting for a reaction. Alexander remained seated, his eyes cold. "I have no intention of giving up my seat. I respect every passenger, but my ticket determines my seat. No one has the right to take it." The flight attendant was momentarily confused. Brandon began to look annoyed, signaling to the staff, "Call the supervisor here. I don't want to waste time with such trivial matters." An elderly woman sitting across the aisle suddenly spoke up, her voice full of authority. "He was sitting right where he paid for it. Why move? This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen." A small cheer rose from a few of the other passengers. Alexander knew this wasn't about seating anymore, it was about respect. After several minutes of arguing, the ground supervisor appeared, his tone half-threatening. "Mr. Thorne, if you do not cooperate, the flight may be delayed." Alexander leaned forward, his voice low but loud enough for everyone to hear. If being right means delaying a flight, then let this flight be delayed. I will not leave seat 1A. The first-class cabin fell silent. Brandon blushed and took out his phone, pretending to be busy. Finally, the supervisor left, reluctantly leaving Alexander where he was. But he knew this was not the end. The plane took off, but inside Alexander, a smoldering fire was burning. Little did he know that this seemingly small event would set off a chain of events that would change not only the airline, but also his life and that of his daughter. The plane landed in San Francisco at dusk. The last rays of the setting sun streamed through the windows, casting a sad yellow hue on Alexander Thorne's face. He waited until most of the other passengers had disembarked before standing. At that moment, the elderly woman sitting across from him nodded slightly, her eyes full of respect and silent encouragement. Alexander smiled slightly, but inside he was in turmoil. He had been on hundreds of flights in his life, had been misunderstood, had been underestimated, but had never felt such open contempt. Not because of the seat, but because of the way they looked at him, as if his value was second only to a familiar face of the airline. A limousine picked him up at the airport. The old driver, Mr. Howard, who had worked for the Thorne family for nearly 20 years, smiled his familiar smile. "Is the flight okay, sir?" Alexander replied in a low voice. "We landed safely, but no, it wasn't okay at all." Howard looked surprised but didn't ask. He was used to his master hiding storms inside. Alexander sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the window. Images flashed through his mind. The flight attendant's averted gaze, the threatening, delayed flight voice, Brandon's sarcastic smile. Alexander knew he could let it go. He had chosen silence many times to keep his peace. But this time, something in him changed. Perhaps it was because of the memory of his ex-wife, the woman who always taught him. "Alexander, if you don't stand up for yourself, no one else will." Back at the Thornell mansion overlooking San Francisco Bay, Alexander tries to mingle with his daughter, Emily, a bright-eyed 17-year-old who is curious about the world. Emily told him about her piano practice at school, about being chosen to perform in the end-of-year concert. But Alexander just smiled awkwardly, his mind still stuck on chair 1A. Finally, Emily put down her knife and fork and looked straight at her father. "Dad, what's wrong? You're not like usual. I can feel it." Alexander was silent for a few seconds, then sighed softly. On the flight today, Dad was asked to leave his reserved seat simply because they thought someone else deserved it better. Emily frowned. But Dad already paid for it. How could that happen? Alexander held his daughter's hand, his eyes solemn. "That's true. And sometimes, Emily, in life, people will try to push you aside just because they don't think you're worth enough. But it's important to remember, your worth isn't determined by them." Emily nodded slightly. Even though she didn't fully understand, she could sense a deep wound in her father's words. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Alexander walked into the study. On the large oak desk, the computer screen reflected a cold blue light. He opened the folder Contracts Airlines. Among them, Sky Vista Airlines, the very airline that just embarrassed him, is Thorne Innovation's biggest customer. His company provides them with the entire software system, from schedule management, aircraft maintenance, to ground support systems. In other words, if Thorne Innovations withdraws, Sky Vista will be in chaos. Alexander picked up the phone and called his trusted assistant Lucas. "Tomorrow, I want the entire Sky Vista contract on the table. Terms, duration, binding, all of it." Lucas hesitated a bit. "Is something serious, sir?" Alexander coldly replied, "They thought I was just a regular passenger. It's time they learned how valuable seat 1A they were trying to take away really is." When Alexander hung up, he sat silently in the dark room. Part of him wanted revenge, but another part of him felt bored. Was this what his late wife would have wanted? Was he teaching Emily a lesson in justice or just revenge? But then the memory of Brandon's arrogant gaze resurfaced. Alexander understood that this was no longer personal. It was about how society treated people it took for granted. The meeting took place in a conference room on the 25th floor. The entire senior management team of Thorn Innovations was present. Lucas presented the contract details, and Trevor, the CFO, presented alternatives. Alexander sat at the head of the table, his eyes sharp as knives. "We will keep the current contract without violating any terms. But from now on, Sky Vista is no longer the #1 priority. Let's turn our attention to their competitors. I want Sky Vista to feel the difference every second." The room fell silent. They knew it when Alexander Thorn made up his mind a corporation would turn like a giant ship. That night, when Alexander returned home, he stood silently on the balcony, looking at the city glowing below. He was torn. Had he gone too far? But then he remembered his daughter's face the night before when she asked, "How could they do this to me?" He whispered to himself, "No, Emily, I'm not just doing this for myself. I'm doing this to make you understand that dignity is never a commodity." In the distance, the lights of Sky Vista headquarters still sparkle. But in just a few days, those lights will tremble before a storm they never expected. Just 3 days after Alexander ordered the strategic adjustment, problems began to appear in Sky Vista Airline system. Flights were delayed due to maintenance data updates. Pilot schedules were disrupted, forcing many to take sudden shifts. Some smaller airports where Sky Vista operates also had problems with online check-in. At the company's Chicago headquarters, frustrated engineering managers called Thorn Innovations repeatedly, but the answer they got was this: "Sorry, our support team is prioritizing other partners. We will process your request within the specified time frame." This made Sky Vista's leadership gradually understand they were no longer favored as before. Meanwhile, Brandon Huxley, the young man who caused the incident on the flight, was also starting to feel the pressure. His father was a real estate tycoon with close ties to Sky Vista. As the incidents continued to occur, news quickly spread to the family. During a lavish dinner, Father Brandon angrily shouted, "Who did you mess with on the flight?" Sky Vista News said there was a first-class passenger named Thorn, and his company was bringing their entire system to its knees. "Do you know who Thorn is?" Brandon swallowed, his face pale. For the first time in his life, he realized he had messed with the wrong person. While Sky Vista was teetering in a small corner of San Francisco, Maya Rivera's story began. Maya is a 24-year-old woman who grew up in a poor working-class Latino family. Her mother worked as an hourly maid, and her father left when Maya was 10. Maya shouldered the responsibility of raising her younger brother, while also working part-time at a downtown cafe to make ends meet. Maya is simple. Her long hair is usually tied back. Her brown eyes light up when she smiles. Despite her poverty, she possesses a special quality, an incredible ability to analyze and memorize data. At the coffee shop, she can remember the names and drinking habits of hundreds of regular customers without taking notes. One day, by chance, Alexander Thorn stopped by the shop. That day, Alexander had just left a closed meeting about Sky Vista's repeated calls for help. He needed a quiet place to think, so he walked into the small cafe where Maya was working the evening shift. Maya quickly came to the table. "Hello, what would you like to have today? Black coffee without sugar like last time." Alexander was a little surprised. This was only his second visit to the shop, yet the young girl remembered. He nodded slightly. "That's right, you have a good memory." Maya smiled. "I have a habit of paying attention to small details. It makes the job less tiring." Alexander looked deep into her eyes, seeing a resilience he had not seen in a long time. Little did he know that this brief encounter would change his entire journey. During subsequent visits, Alexander gradually got to know Maya. He realized that behind her simple appearance was a girl with great intelligence and intuition. She could analyze situations and make comments that made even Alexander, a veteran CEO, think. Once, when he complained vaguely about an airline that doesn't respect its customers, Maya was blunt. "There are battles that are not worth fighting, but there are times when silence makes people think we are weak. What matters is how you want to be remembered." The statement touched Alexander, for it recalled his late wife's own words. Meanwhile, Sky Vista was in real trouble. The press began reporting a series of flight delays. Passengers complained furiously on social media. Some business newspapers even revealed that their largest software partner, Thorn Innovations, was being deprioritized. In the Sky Vista CEO office, the atmosphere was like sitting on fire. They called Alexander, begging for a meeting to renegotiate, but Alexander remained silent. Only Maya, the girl working at the cafe, saw the real torment in his eyes. Alexander wasn't cold-blooded. He was just trying to find a balance between justice and humanity. One evening, after the cafe had emptied, Maya placed a cup of hot coffee in front of Alexander and said softly, "Mr. Thorn, sometimes forgiveness is not about letting others be at peace, but about finding peace yourself." Alexander was silent for a long time. A new struggle began within him, between his CEO pride and his desire to heal old wounds, something that only his family, and perhaps this girl, could help him realize. On the other side, Sky Vista is still in the midst of a storm, but little do they know that the real storm has just begun. News of Sky Vista Airlines' repeated flight delays spread across national television. Passengers were outraged, and boycott hashtags were all over social media. Investors began to withdraw their funds, and the airline's stock plummeted. In the Sky Vista CEO office, Martin Greaves, who has run the company for the past 10 years, slumped over the conference table, his gray hair a mess. He couldn't understand why Thorn Innovations, his former partner, had turned its back on him. An advisor whispered, "We've touched Thorn's nerve. It seems that what happened on the flight last week was more than just a small misunderstanding." Martin sighed. He knew well, sometimes a seat number 1A could be worth billions of dollars. That same week, Martin personally delivered a letter to Alexander Thorn's office. The letter was brief but filled with desperation. "Dear Mr. Thorn, we sincerely apologize for the incident that occurred on the flight yesterday. It was an inexcusable mistake. I hope we can meet to discuss repairing the relationship. Sky Vista appreciates Thorn Innovations and you personally. Martin Greaves." Alexander read the letter, but instead of feeling elated, he felt an emptiness. Part of him wanted to see her, to hear her apology in person. But another part of him remembered the look in his daughter's eyes. How could they do this to Dad? That evening, Alexander stopped by the shop where Maya worked. After closing time, he sat alone on the porch while Maya wiped down the tables and walked over. Maya asked softly, "Have you received the apology letter?" Alexander was a little surprised. "How did you know?" Maya smiled lightly. "Rumors about Sky Vista are everywhere. People are talking about it everywhere." Alexander nodded, his voice low. "I could answer them, but I'm not sure I want to. They only apologized because they were forced to. If the incident had no consequences, they would never admit it." Maya looked at him, her eyes gentle. "Maybe. But maybe forgiveness isn't about them. Forgiveness is about finding peace for yourself. Mr. Thorne, maybe your pain didn't start with Sky Vista, but a long time ago with the flight your wife never returned from." Alexander paused. His heart was broken. No one outside his family had ever dared to touch that pain. Maya, a young, poor girl, saw through it. That night, Alexander returned home and stood in front of his wife's picture on the wall. In his memory, he heard the familiar voice again. "Alexander, true justice is not always about revenge. Sometimes, justice is about preventing wrongs from happening again." But then he remembered Brandon, the arrogant guy who stole the chair and made everything explode. Was letting go too easy for such people? Alexander sat silently for hours, his heart heavy between two paths. One was to let Sky Vista pay the price to the end. Two was to give them a chance to make amends. Meanwhile, Martin Greaves called an emergency meeting. He shouted from the room, "If we don't restore relations with Thorne, Sky Vista will collapse before the end of the year. Do you understand?" Another director replied, but Thorne didn't respond. "They are still negotiating with their rivals. If they pull out completely, we're done." Martin scratched his head in despair. For the first time in his years in business, he realized that a mistake based on disrespect for people could bring down an empire. While Alexander struggles with big decisions, Maya has a small dream. She wants to earn enough money to get her younger brother, Miguel, out of their violent neighborhood and give him a better future. She never thought she would be linked to a powerful man like Alexander Thorne. But fate, once again, brought together two seemingly opposite worlds. One night, when Alexander left the bar, Maya suddenly said, "Mr. Thorne, sometimes a door closes not to punish us, but to lead us to another door. Have you ever thought that instead of destroying Sky Vista, you could use this opportunity to change the way they treat humans?" Alexander stood still, looking at Maya. This girl not only saw through him, but also opened up a path he had never thought of. Alexander returned home and sat down at his desk. In front of him were two envelopes, one containing a contract to cancel all cooperation with Sky Vista, the other containing a draft of a new agreement requiring them to radically change the way they operate and respect their customers. He muttered softly, "Forgiveness or justice or both?" In the darkness, his eyes shone with determination. The answer would not only decide the fate of Sky Vista, but also the path he and Emily would walk in the future. The next morning, sunlight streamed into Alexander Thorne's luxurious office. On the table, two envelopes still lay. One was a contract cancellation order, the other was an agreement to reform Sky Vista. He picked up each envelope, weighing it. Two voices echoed in his head. Voice of the deceased wife. Justice is not just revenge, but preventing mistakes from being repeated. Emily's voice. Dad, our worth is not determined by others. Alexander closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them, his choice was clear. That afternoon, at Thorne Innovations headquarters, Alexander called the entire executive team together. To a tense silence, he announced, We will not cancel the contract immediately. But Sky Vista has only one choice. Either accept a comprehensive overhaul from the service system to the customer treatment policy, or we will withdraw completely when the contract expires. And I want all these terms to be clearly stated, public, and transparent. The room fell silent, then erupted into discussion. Some were wary of the risks, others nodded in agreement. But everyone understood. This decision bore Alexander's hallmark: strong, fair, and uncompromising. 2 days later, Sky Vista CEO Martin Greaves and his senior management flew to San Francisco to meet Alexander. The atmosphere in the glass conference room overlooking the bay was so thick that everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Martin bowed his head and said frankly, "Mr. Thorne, we are not here to make excuses but to beg for a chance to make things right. We accept whatever you ask." Alexander looked straight, his eyes cold. "A belated apology is not enough. You must sign this new agreement. And above all, I want to see real change, not just on paper." Martin nodded, his voice trembling. "You will see, I promise." In that moment, Alexander realized he had won, but the victory wasn't just the downfall of Sky Vista. It was forcing them to respect humanity. That evening, Alexander stopped by Maya's little coffee shop again. When he told her about the meeting, Maya smiled. He chose the harder path, but it was the right one. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing how to hold back your power. Alexander looked at her, an indescribable feeling rising in his heart. For years, he had been immersed in work, closing his heart after the pain of losing his wife. But now, Maya's presence, simple yet resilient, made him feel comforted, enlightened. On the weekend, Alexander invites Maya to his house for dinner with him and Emily. Emily is a bit reserved at first, but is quickly drawn to Maya's warmth and simplicity. During dinner, Maya told her father about her dream of taking her brother out of the slum. Emily listened with rapt attention, her eyes sparkling. After dinner, Emily whispered to her father, "Dad, I think it's a good thing to pay attention to Maya. She brings you something just like Mom did." His daughter's words shook Alexander's heart. He didn't answer right away, but a door opened in his heart. When everyone had gone back to their rooms, Alexander stood on the balcony looking out at the night sea. He suddenly realized the battle with Sky Vista was just the beginning. What was more important was learning how to heal himself and his family. He whispered, "Maya, perhaps you are a reminder that there is still room for hope in life." In the darkness, Alexander felt lighter than ever. He had kept justice, forced Sky Vista to change, and more importantly, he was slowly finding himself again through the presence of Maya and the love of Emily. But the journey is not over yet. For a new challenge lies ahead, the final one, where Alexander must confront both his painful past and his promising future. A few weeks after the historic meeting, Sky Vista Airlines announced a series of reforms to the press. They pledged to abolish the VIP privilege policy that only serves the wealthy, establish a department dedicated to monitoring the behavior of flight attendants and supervisors, implement the training program "Every passenger deserves respect." The media was noisy, but to Alexander, he just smiled quietly. He knew he could not change the world, but at least he had made a powerful corporation kneel before the value of respect. At a public event, Brandon Huxley, the guy who stole the 1A seat, appeared. No longer arrogant, he walked closer to Alexander, bowed his head gently. "Mr. Thorne, I apologize. I was too arrogant, and I understand that small action that day caused everything to fall apart. I will never forget this lesson." Alexander just looked at him, his eyes calm. Then he replied briefly, "The important thing is not to apologize to me, but to change the way you treat everyone else." Brandon nodded, then stepped back. In that moment, Alexander felt a circle close. The atmosphere at the Thorne mansion was different now. Emily and Maya gradually became close. Emily often invited Maya to listen to her play the piano, and Maya told Emily stories about her poor but resilient childhood. One evening, as the three of them sat by the fireplace, Emily suddenly took her father's hand, her voice full of confidence. "Dad, I think Mom will be happy to see us have another member of the family." Alexander was silent. He looked at Maya, the girl with determined brown eyes, and suddenly understood. It was no coincidence that she appeared in his life at the moment he lost his way. The next day, when the cafe was empty, Alexander sat down at his usual table. Maya placed a cup of black coffee in front of him. He smiled. "Thank you, but today I didn't just come for coffee." Maya tilted her head, surprised. Alexander took a deep breath. "Maya, you made me look back at my life that true strength lies not in defeating your opponents, but in forgiving, in loving. I can't promise you a perfect world, but I want you to walk with me for the rest of my life. Do you agree?" Maya's eyes sparkled. She didn't speak right away, but her smile and slight nod were enough to warm Alexander's heart after so many years of coldness. A few months later, Alexander, Maya, and Emily took their first flight after the crisis. When they boarded the first-class cabin, the flight attendant bowed and said sincerely, "Welcome back, Mr. Thorne. Seat 1A is ready for you." Alexander looked at the ticket, then turned to Maya, smiling. "Today, Seat 1A is no longer important. What matters is who sits next to me." He held Maya's hand while Emily sat right behind, smiling happily. Three people, three different fates, now became a new family. As the plane soared into the sky, Alexander closed his eyes, letting the memories roll back. From a flight filled with injustice, he found justice. From an old wound, he found healing. And from a small coffee shop, he found new love. He whispered in his heart, "Respect isn't about wealth or status. It's about how you treat others when no one is watching. A small chair can change your whole destiny, but only if you stand up for yourself." As I reflect on this story, I can't help but see myself in it. And maybe you can too. Life has a way of testing us, sometimes in the smallest, most unexpected moments. What I've learned is this: respect and dignity aren't luxuries reserved for a few. They are the birthright of every human being. When someone tries to strip that away from you, remember, your true worth cannot be defined by anyone else's opinion. But I also believe life isn't just about standing your ground. It's about choosing the battles that shape who you are and how you'll be remembered. So I ask you, if you were in that same situation, would you have had the courage to hold firm? Or would you have walked away? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And before we close, I want to remind you, if you find this story meaningful and want to help us share these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Together, we can build a strong community full of potential and a spirit of justice.